Welcome to That's Our Age.
Welcome to That's a Reach podcast. The goal of this podcast is to answer young adults' questions about theology, life, and the gospel from a biblical standpoint. We hope you enjoy.
Welcome to That's a Reach, everybody. We're back here with all of us fellas. We got a good episode. We're going to talk about some real good ministerial topics. So it's going to be fun. All right, question number 1. What did it look like when you guys were called to ministry? Were you called directly to pastoral ministry? Did it happen all at once or over time?
I'll go first because, well, ministry was not in your path earlier on in life either, was it? It wasn't in mine. I was wanting to be an IT guy, and kind of long story short on all of that, I was wanting to, I made all my own plans, wanted to like go to college, do computer stuff, make money, do whatever I wanted. And long story short, I was miserable, and I asked God why. And he reminded me that he had been telling me for years, like all through high school, calling me to ministry. And it all of a sudden made sense. Like all of the times that we would kind of hear the call and kind of turn from it on purpose and just basically tell God to leave me alone. And so when I came to that realization, I was a freshman in college, about 2/3 through the school year. And I remember after that, as I was trying to confirm that, I was reading scripture, doing a quiet time with all of that on my mind as I was wrestling with that realization of my call. And I was reading in Isaiah, and Isaiah 6:8 came, and it was one of those where it's like, oh, you know, that's the God saying, who shall we send? Who will go for us? And Isaiah says, here I am, send me. And I'm like, dadgummit, that's it. Like that's what I'm feeling, that the Lord is saying, I'm making an opportunity. Do you want on board? And I was like, yeah, I am. Like, whatever. I don't care what I do now at this point. I'm not going to make plans anymore. Every time I try, it's bad. And in the 20 years since then, every time I do try and make plans, it does not go well. As it's been 20 years since that, as I was 19 when that is, and I am currently 39 currently. And yeah, our callings, and something I've learned in that, because the other part of the question, did it happen all at once or over time? One thing that I've found in that too, because I have 20 years behind me on the surrendering to the call, is nothing in life is stagnant. And for me, I didn't, when I went to seminary, I was always annoyed with bros that would be like, I'm going to be a pastor. I'm going to go back to Hole in the Wall, Mississippi, and I'm going to pastor my grandma's church. And I was always like, how in the world do you know that? Like how do you know what the Lord's going to call you to do? Because I've always taken the opposite of an overly idealistic approach of, I'm not going to move until the Lord splits the sky and tells me it's time, just like he did before, which was also wrong. But what I found was, and I've mentioned this a lot recently, but it's like obedience in the moment, because in the moment, things change over time. As I've grown as a man and as a disciple and as a husband, my calling has shifted because God's grown me in areas of skill and in comprehension of what's going on, and especially in my maturity. And so he has added different things to my plate, and also kind of changed even what I want to do as I've grown. Some of the things I want to accomplish are not the same things I thought about 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And so my calling has definitely shifted, because the things I'm doing now at Evergreen, I was not ready to do 5 years ago. The things I was struggling through 5 years ago in the church plant that we were a part of was preparing me for where I am now. And so things grow and change. And I think that's probably the same thing for anyone in and out of ministry, but especially within ministry, when your maturity is like a dependent, important thing about how effective you're going to be in ministry, because you're trying to lead people. Their spiritual and mental well-being is kind of in your hands. And so you want to be a good steward of that. And so you need to be spiritually and emotionally mature to do those things. And so, yeah, the Lord just wants me to be faithful with what he's given me in the moment. And just like I preached on the parable of the talents last week, and, you're faithful with 2 and now you have 4. He's like, cool, good job. Take those 4, and he'll continue to add to those things for you. So that's been my experience with ministry for 20 years.
Yeah. my little sister and her husband were missionaries in Southeast Asia for a little bit, and they kind of had an interesting tension that had formed in some of their conversations with other missionaries, because these other missionaries had this idea about their calling that was very, I don't want to put words in people's mouths, but kind of like this clarity in one moment for all of life.
Mhm.
And my little sister said that they would have these people would kind of look at them strange when they say, we don't know that we're going to be missionaries forever. Like, well, you've been called. And she said, what we've been called to is to be obedient.
Yeah.
And the next thing we've been called to be obedient in is this mission opportunity. And they're not missionaries anymore. And they were called to the next thing, right? And I think that there. So you mentioned both of these, which I think is interesting. You mentioned like kind of the side you fell on and the side that you were reacting to. And there's like this do whatever you want and God will sanctify you approach, which I don't subscribe to. I think that's one extreme. And then there's the other extreme, which is like the clouds will open up and the beam of light will shine through. And it's like, yeah, that's not how that tends to work either, right? And I think we hear a lot of those stories.
For me, it's been once in 20 years. Where it was like
there was
super obvious.
one moment,
Yeah.
right? And that's the thing is like, even that, was that cloud opening up moment like for your whole life, now you know everything that you're going to do,
No.
Exactly. And so one of the things that I think is interesting, like in my story, I was called to be obedient with the ministry opportunities in front of me. And I was very hesitant to say, I'm being called to be a pastor. I'm being called to full-time ministry. I just knew I was called to this next thing in ministry, this next thing in ministry. Now, there is a point after I've already been serving in a pastoral role and I've already been, I'm on staff at a church where I actually did come to a place where I went, oh, I really do think that this is where I think God is showing me that he's calling me to pastoral ministry in a permanent way. But there was two things that went together with that. One is that calling was about the way I live my life, not the job I'm taking. Right? And I'm called to have a pastoral mindset, whether or not I'm working at a church or I'm selling car insurance, right? And then the second piece is that I wasn't ready to receive that call before that moment. And if all you do is just wait and you go, well, God's going to call me. I'm going to get this calling and that's going to be the thing I'm doing. You're actually making it so that maybe God needs to get you to a place. He needs to get you to a point where he can call you. And if you're not moving at all, if you're not being obedient with the next thing, how do you get there? How do you get to that place where God can call you to the thing? And so there's this unwillingness to just be obedient with kind of what's next, because I don't know what God wants me to do for the rest of my life. And here's the thing, chances are the calling that you get, which is like this purposeful, hey, you're going to be a pastor. That doesn't mean I'm going to work at this church and do this kind of ministry and that's the calling forever. There's a lot to that I don't know. And if God tomorrow said, hey, I'm calling you to be a pastor on the mission field, well, guess what? I'm going to pack up and go on the mission field, right? And so I think that there's it was both a progression and an all at once, but the progression is what got me to the place of the all at once. And one of the things that you talked about, and this is kind of a pet peeve of mine, is like, there's this unwillingness to just serve. Like it's calling and separation. God calls and your church separates. And if you do not serve with a servant's heart in your church, then who's going to recognize your calling to separate you? And so there's this unwilling, like, okay, I've been called to X kind of ministry, so that's the only way I want to serve.
Right.
And it's like, well, that's not how it works. How it works is if you believe that you're being called, then you do what you're talking about, which is whatever. Wherever you tell me to serve, Lord, I'm going to serve there obediently with a joyful heart for this season. And as you do that, your servant's heart and your calling become apparent to your church, which then should separate you and say, we're recognizing your calling. That's what an ordination is. It's a recognition of your calling. And then they say, we're going to help you fundraise for seminary, or we're going to hire you into this youth pastoral, or we're going to put you on the worship team or whatever. But the point is like, it is that serving in the local body that allows you to be recognized as someone who has that servant's heart and that calling.
Yeah.
And if you have this unwillingness that says like, I'm only going to serve in the one place that I feel gifted, you may be gifted there. I'm not saying you aren't, but you've told me you don't have a servant's heart. You're not willing to pitch in your local body in anywhere that needs help.
Mhm.
You know, you've determined the way that you're going to serve.
Yeah.
You
I
know?
think going to a lot of the other stuff we often talk about, an ordination and even having a vocational ministry job is like a formal organizational aspect of someone who has proven that they're fat.
Yes,
that
right.
they're faithful, available, and teachable.
Yes.
If you're not that way, then you're not going to be a good minister. Like
Yeah.
being a minister doesn't mean like on pastoral staff doesn't mean that you've arrived
Yeah.
and you have nothing else to learn. And now I'm just bestowing my brilliance on everyone else. It's like,
Well, and
no,
you,
not at
you know,
all.
you just said it. I'm glad you brought up the acronym because really it's always a deficiency in one of those categories, right? I'm called to ministry, but I don't show up to anything.
because it's
I'm-
not the thing I want to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm called to ministry, but when you ask me to do something, I'm unavailable.
Mhm.
I'm called to ministry, but nobody gets to tell me how to be in ministry.
Mhm.
It's like,
Mhm.
okay, one of those things is deficient. If one of those things is deficient, then we can't help. And here's the thing. So there's this very real thing that will happen, which is that you'll be asked to serve in ways and in places that you don't want to serve.
Mhm.
Now, on the one hand, you're just showing that you have that servant's heart. But on the other hand, you have no idea what the Lord is going to use to equip you for where you're going to end up.
That's why I wasn't ready to be here 5 years ago.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's things about, you may be asked, hey, serve over here in this capacity. And you're like, that sounds horrible. But you do it faithfully. You find ways to be edified in it and to get and to praise God for what's happening. And then, 10 years down the road is when you go, oh my goodness, that experience I learned something there that's affecting my ministry here.
Yes.
And if you just shut yourself off from that, then good luck.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You can't be in ministry devoid of the accountability of your local body.
Mhm.
That's my whole point. And I think that's what I did right on accident, which is that I didn't know I was going into ministry. And because I didn't know I was going into ministry, I was doing ministry just because I was being asked. I was being
Mhm.
obedient. I was doing the things I was supposed to do because I was in the body.
Mhm.
And as that happened, all of a sudden my calling and separation by the church became more and more apparent. And then it was like, oh, I'm headed towards ministry. And the church is helping me see that and then separating me to then make that possible, But it's too much, we have this almost like American idea about it, like you got to engineer your way to like your career path
Yeah.
in ministry. And it's like, that's not how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, and that's the opposite of being fat.
Yes.
Because that's you making your own plans and you're not being faithful, available, and teachable in those areas. Like, can someone ascend in the ministry world and get a cool platform? Sure, off of hard work and like charisma and all that. But those are also where we have the most dramatic stories of burnout and crashing and burning morally or whatever else.
Moral corruption and things like this.
Because they weren't ready for the platform that they were given because they didn't grow incrementally the way that you're supposed to grow.
I forget. I think it's Soul Winner. It may not be Soul Winner, but one of the Spurgeon books that I was reading for one of my seminary classes said, Spurgeon says, I pray that the young pastors are spit on, walked on, treated poorly. And he says, too many men have been lifted up too early and been carried away by it. And I remember hearing that line and thinking, Lord, don't let me be carried away by early success.
Mhm.
And sometimes when you get like disgruntled and you're like, I thought I'd be further in this or I'd be doing better in that. And then you think, yeah, but maybe it's too early.
Yeah.
Maybe it's too early. Maybe I need to be humbled in where I am and let God work out that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to point it out, to kind of poke the bear a little bit, some conversations that I know I've had and we've had with some young guys in that are chomping at the bit for ministry stuff, they think they're ready for more just because they know things.
Yeah, right. Yeah, like Bible trivia.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. faith, that's why it doesn't say, it's not KFAT. It's not knowledge, faithful, available, and teachable. We can teach you what you need to know.
Sure.
It's
Well, and to be honest, the Lord is actually more likely to use somebody who is faithful, available, and teachable, who knows way less. And because there's this puffing up, right? This prideful puffing up that really just makes you impossible to use,
Right.
because you know everything.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Which leads into the second question, I think.
Cool.
Yeah. Second question is this. Are all the spiritual gifts of the Bible still seen in the modern world today? And how do I know which spiritual gift I have?
Yeah, I love both of these questions. I mean, it's really a 2-for-1, right?
Yeah.
First of all, I'm not a cessationist. I don't think any of the spiritual gifts has ceased. I understand the arguments. I don't begrudge people who are cessationists. I think the biggest problem with the way we view the sign gifts, for their maybe the most specific term, is the interpretation of what they are,
right?
Not with whether or not they're still around. I think that this is probably maybe too long for this podcast, but if we were to walk through like my interpretation of prophecy, my interpretation of tongues, my interpretation of, gifts of healing, I would say that some of those things are absolutely still happening. I think some of those things happen even around us in some ways, but where do they happen the most is where they're needed. That's I think the reason we don't see them is because we live in a society where it's not as necessary. Like for instance, if you go to Corinthians and you want to dissect the tongues conversation they're having there, well, where are the Corinthians? They're in a port town. I think it had 2 ports. It was one of the most major trade, hubs. There would have been in their church alone, 10, 15 languages. And so even though everyone in the room probably spoke Greek, tongues would have been a way to evangelize and worship together in a way that in your heart language that would have edified the body. And so I don't think that those things have ceased. I just think that they're not as readily apparent in our context in some ways.
Yeah.
Again, not without jumping too much into the weeds, I think my spiritual gift is prophecy. But I'm not claiming the office of prophet and that I'm a future seeing, future telling, vision having, predictor of anything. It's like, I think that means truth telling.
Yeah, that's not the biblical example anyway.
I would argue that's not the biblical example even in the Old Testament of what we have,
Right.
And so I think it's interesting to kind of navigate some of that.
Yeah.
And the reason I said this fits into our last question is because the second part, and how do I know what spiritual gift I have? You serve. And this is
absolutely.
This is the big question here. Is your spiritual gift what fulfills you? Or is what you do with your spiritual gift what fulfills you? Because if you think your spiritual gift is, well, I found out my spiritual gift is service. My spiritual gift is giving. And that's what will fulfill me. It won't. It is a vehicle by which you do what? You make disciples. That's what fulfills you.
Yeah.
And if you will, okay, so now you're in the context of the church and you say, you know what? I'm going to be about what the church is about. I'm going to make disciples. You will naturally make disciples more and more according to your spiritual giftings.
Yeah.
Right? Lily Foster is a great example of this. Lily Foster almost certainly has a spiritual gift of evangelism. Well, how do we know? Because as she goes about making disciples, she can't help but share the gospel, and people can't help but get saved when she shares the gospel.
Yeah.
And the same person, like literally somebody else could share the gospel just as much as her and have way less of the effect. Well, why? Because she probably has that as a spiritual gifting.
Yeah.
But what is she doing? Why is it?
Don't misconstrue spiritual gifting with skill. It's not she's just so good at it.
She's not just so good at it. She'll tell you that she'll have this almost weird third person experience of like, I guess I'm sharing the gospel right now,
Yeah.
And when that happens, what is fulfilling to her in that process is not that she is activating her spiritual gift. What's fulfilling to her in that process is that disciples are being made because of it.
Yeah.
It's like, that's the point.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say too, on how do you know what it is? There are tests, like you can do that. And I think having an inventory, because it gives us clarity. When you look at, some people will look at a list and it's like, oh, there's 12 spiritual gifts. Some people say there's like 30 spiritual gifts.
Right.
Like it can get confusing. So to narrow something down with an inventory to make it some version of clarity can be helpful.
Sure.
But then I was going to say serving too, because when you're actually doing the work, that's when your community, your leaders, your disciplers are going to affirm what they see the Lord doing in you. No matter wherever the Lord is putting you, the community helps affirm that is what you're effective in, that's what the
Yes.
Lord's moving through you in
Yes.
those things. And so how do you know what it is? Just like you said, like, do the work of the ministry, like whatever that is. And if it's not a good fit, that's when, if you're being fat, then your leaders will be like, hey, this isn't the best fit, but I know you kind of have this
Yes.
knack. Why don't you think about this?
Yes.
They will help direct
Well,
you.
and again,
that was my experience
because
20
it's
years ago.
supernatural. It's almost involuntary. It is involuntary, right? It's as you seek this end goal. I mean, what is the first fulfilling command given in the Bible? Be fruitful and multiply. Well, that command, although literally about having babies, is not exclusively about having babies. You then get to the Great Commission, which is what? The command to be fruitful and multiply in a spiritual sense. And so then what does that mean? Human flourishing, the most fulfilling version of life, is to be fruitful and multiply, to orient yourself and others on God. Okay, well then your spiritual gift becomes the way that you most supernaturally accomplish that. And if that's how you think of it, then finding your spiritual gift becomes just, I don't know, connecting to your local church and helping your local church make disciples. Then all of a sudden you'll start manifesting that spiritual gift.
Yeah.
Not in the, I guess, common use of that word, but in the actual like reality of like, oh my gosh, I figured it out because I was doing it so much.
Well, manifest is sometimes used the wrong way,
A
but
butchered term.
it made me think about, people can have the same general spiritual giftings, but it will manifest itself in different ways. Just to oversimplify it, someone can have a spiritual gift of teaching and they can be a really extroverted person and have no problem being in a big group, or someone can have the spiritual gift of teaching and be a very introverted person and would rather just really go for it and have lots of one-on-one disciple type of situations. And they just keep making disciples because they're just walking with one-on-one close-knit things. And it's the same spiritual gift. It's just manifested in a different way.
Right.
And
There is personality involved.
Yeah, for sure. And so don't look at other people and be like, whoa, Matt did this. I guess this is how going into ministry works.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because we're all called to make disciples, but it is actually a group command. So like it's the church that makes, okay, so like you're in the tech booth on Sunday morning. Well, guess what? You're making it possible that's why Paul says like you can't have one part of the body without the other, because what good would the proclamation of the gospel from the stage be if there's not the sound booth to make sure that the guy in the back row who needs to hear the gospel actually can hear the gospel? And it's like, yeah, you're a part of making disciples as you plug into your local body.
Yeah. I love how this question really did connect, and we'll connect to the next question, but also the last one, which is it really is about making disciples, bringing God's love to other people. Thinking about the last question, we're called to a people, not a position. And that was something that stuck out to me when I was going through the whole process of, I don't know what position I want to do. I don't care. I just know that I want to help others come to know the Father's love and to love him the same way that he used these other men in my life, bring that to me. And so whatever position God wants to use me for that, that's what it is. But the point is making disciples and using our spiritual gifts for that. So last question. Are all the spiritual gifts? Nope. I would love to hear a discussion and encouragement on how to keep a missional-minded lifestyle in the everyday, typical Monday through Friday type job, as opposed to an occupational ministry position like staff for a church or a short-term mission trip.
I have some suggestions from what I experienced in the church plant world. One instance that Kiva and I often think about was when we were leading small groups in New Orleans. We did the same thing in our other places as well, but especially because when we were in New Orleans, that was when I was 23 to 28 years old in New Orleans. And so I was specifically reach age living there. And I would have a friend or a neighbor or whoever, and it'd be like, oh, I know that she works at such and such restaurant this weekend, and she likes me, but I keep inviting her to church, didn't want to come to church. So I'm like, I'm going to just call my life group and see how many of them want to go and hang out at the restaurant on Friday. She's working. We'll hang for a few hours, eat a bunch of food, have her sit down with us when she's not busy, and just make friends with her. And then things would naturally happen where it's like, so-and-so from my group invited her over for a crawfish broil or whatever. And she starts to make friends with other Christians from my church and from my life group. And then when I say, hey, Easter's coming up, you want to come? And they're like, oh, no. I'm like, well, remember like so-and-so and so-and-so, they're going to be there too. And they're like, yeah, okay. Because we're created for a relationship. Mm-hmm. And so, that goes to the Great Commission and to the greatest commandment. Like we're created to make disciples and to have relationship. And that's what the world wants. And so when you in a natural way show the warmth and the love and fellowship that exists within the church community, then I've seen it be really effective. Mm-hmm. And so I think just in this like, a Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 thing, it's like, okay, if you're really good friends with that person you share a cubicle with or whatever, and they want to go grab food with you after work one day, call someone from your life group. Be like, hey, can I have a few friends meet us there? They work in the same area or whatever. And just be creative and intentional, because when you build relationships without it being like, we're not trying to trick them. Like I genuinely like this person, but they're lost. And I genuinely like these people and they're my brothers and sisters in Christ. Well, I would love for them to meet each other. Yeah. And you can be very strategic with that.
Yeah. You have something?
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I think a huge aspect that we miss is like just praying about having this eternal perspective and eternal mindset. It's like, if you pray and ask the Father to continue to keep your mind focused on that, then it will naturally come out. I tell people, they're always like, how do I like just bring God into conversations? And it's like, usually you don't go a day without someone ask you, what are you up to? And it's like, take that opportunity, like, well, I went to Reach on Tuesday night and this is what the pastor talked about. And then you share the gospel through a conversation. Yeah. It's like, just
you can always tell people what God has been teaching you.
Yeah.
And honestly, you can do it in the least threatening way possible. Mm-hmm. I mean, you walk up to somebody like, what do you believe? It's already, their defense is up. Yeah. But like, if you walk up to somebody like, wow, man, this Tuesday, like this is what happened in the sermon. And I learned this, like people are just intrigued. Yeah. They're like, huh, weird.
Yeah.
What is that about?
What a different lifestyle.
And here's what I tell people. Okay. Colossians 3 says, whatever you do it for the Lord. Mm-hmm. And Paul reminds slaves over and over again, like, you're free in Christ, like look to, work for your masters because you're trying to set a good example for the Lord or set a good example for people, to point them to the Lord. And what I always tell people is like, there's nothing wrong with having a job because it pays your bills. That's a blessing of a job. That's what God gives you a job so that your bills are paid, right? There's nothing wrong with career progression in a job. Maybe God wants to elevate you to higher and higher positions. But if you go to work and you forget that you're working for the Lord and you go there to just get your shift over with, clock in, clock out, get your paycheck, or you work, you don't have time for people because you got to work extra hard to get to that next level. What you're doing is you're actually forcing it to be as temporal as it is.
Yeah.
You're forcing it to be, and that's inherently unfulfilling.
Yeah.
If instead, when you go to work, you think, man, I have the rest of this shift today to display Christ in my behaviors and attitudes, and even to maybe make that connection that's going to allow me to invite that person to church or share the gospel or whatever. Now all of a sudden you are doing your job for the Lord. It even, by the way, keeps you're having a bad day, you're at work and you don't want to work hard, and you don't when the boss isn't around, when the manager's not watching you. Okay, but when you think, no, wait, I'm not here for the manager. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm here for the Lord. Well, then one of your coworkers looks at you and goes, man, why are you so diligent? Why don't you slack off when the manager's not around? Well, because I'm not working for him. Mm-hmm. I work for the Lord.
Yeah.
Boom. Conversation, spiritual conversation, right? Mm-hmm. And it's about having that eternal perspective that then changes the way that you operate even when nobody is looking, because guess what? God is looking.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden the temporal, drudgery that is, because here's the deal. It's one way or the other. You either have the temporal drudgery that is, I just got to get through my shift to pay my bills. That's draining. Or you fight tooth and nail and work so hard to get to that next promotion only to realize that one didn't do it. That's not enough money. Maybe it's the next promotion, right? They worked so well this time. And it's like, no, stop doing either of those things. I'm not saying don't progress. I'm not saying don't pay your bills. I'm saying those are not the reason you go to work.
Yeah.
Well, dude, to brag on someone at Reach, talk about a guy, Dalton Richardson, who works a job 9 to 5, at the hospital, who you can't tell me he's not called to ministry. Like even though he's not fully
like
vocational,
an occupational ministry. Yeah.
Go ask him about his stories about like someone that he's given a ER, what is it? X-ray too. Yeah.
An ER.
Yeah, whatever. Something like that. XR.
Bring the whole ER to you.
Yeah. Doing the X-rays, someone asked him, "How are you?" And he goes into it.
Yeah.
It's like, God's
There
so
was literally
good.
a lady who remembered him because he had Jesus's eyes.
Yeah. It's like
Whatever that means. But
I knew he
she
did.
remembered him.
Yeah.
I knew he did.
Yeah, it's like, dude, go ask that guy about how to be on mission without having a full-time vocational job.
Yeah. Because then it becomes fulfilling because you see it not as a means to an end to pay your bills, but as just another circle of influence that the Lord's divinely orchestrated that you would have that.
Yeah.
And so I mentioned that a lot, like pray for divine appointments and recognize the friend group you have, the neighborhood you're in, the job you're in. Those are all divine circles of a Venn diagram that the Lord has sovereignly given you for a purpose, and it's to make disciples, because that's where, going back to the other questions, where you actually find fulfillment, because that's what we're made to do.
I had this down season. I've been doing BJJ for some time now, and I had this down season in BJJ where I was super angry about it all the time. I would didn't want to go. I'd go in, I wouldn't have a good time, and I would leave frustrated. And it was because I either I wasn't progressing the way I wanted to, or I was getting frustrated and too competitive in the time training or whatever. There's whatever myriad of reasons that I had a bad attitude about it. Well, then I realized every time that I go in there with a bad attitude and then I lose my temper or get frustrated, obviously in a role with somebody, I'm not orienting that person on Christ, and I'm not displaying Christ by my behaviors in a way where they would even want to listen to me if I invited them to church. I said, you know what, that's the wrong. So now on my way there, I oftentimes will spend that time in prayer saying, Lord, no matter how today goes, if today is the worst training session I've ever had, let me react in a way that displays Christ. And honestly, I've been enjoying it a lot more because my attitude is correct when I'm in there, and it's like, that's not I wanted to bring that example up because it's not job specific, but it's the same idea of am I on mission when I'm in that room? I'm on mission when I'm in every room.
Even our hobbies and stuff, the Lord will use.
Yes. Well, I go to the range a lot, and I remember hitting this point where I was like, I don't think I should go to the range by myself anymore. I think that's a bad use of my time. I think if I'm going to go to the range, I need to take somebody who I need to get quality time with. Instead of using it as an escape, it became a time for discipleship. It's that's such a better use of that time,
For those who may not know, BJJ means Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
That's a pretty common term.
Well, there are some people who are
Google it.
Nerds.
Yeah. Well, this has been a good episode. So submit more questions. Thank you for joining us on That's a Reach. Till next time.
Yeah. Next time we'll make sure your mic doesn't fall down the whole time. It was slowly shrinking.
I wasn't touching it. So.
I know, it wasn't you.
Thanks for joining us. We hope this episode was helpful in your daily pursuit of Christ. If you would like to get a question answered, see the link in the description.
Now it is. I think I just walked in the shot. Just do it first, but yeah, that's what we. And then you'll say the thing.
Welcome to That's a Reach.
Taylor's just blank letting it happen.
No, coming out was improvised.
Yeah, I think it'll actually add to it that I'm just sitting here scared.
Because there's been multiple episodes where we're doing something stupid and you're just watching us.